Some silences are louder than screams, and the one that filled the grand ballroom that night was heavy enough to crush pride. Kang Min-jae stood still near the edge of the room, dressed in black that matched the mood he had worn since his divorce. Crystal chandeliers glowed above laughing elites, their voices smooth and careless, as if cruelty were just another language they spoke fluently. Tonight was meant to be a charity event, but Min-jae quickly understood it was something else entirely, a stage. At the center of that stage stood his mother, Madame Kang Sun-hee. She held herself with practiced grace, spine straight, hands folded, but Min-jae saw what others pretended not to notice. The tightness around her eyes. The way her fingers trembled slightly as women draped in silk whispered too loudly. Words like failed marriage, greedy mother, raised him wrong floated through the air, sharp and deliberate. They were not accidents. They were knives. Min-jae's jaw tightened. As the leader of a feared organization, he was used to enemies and threats. Violence, betrayal, blood. Those were languages he understood. But this was humiliation served with polite smiles. And for the first time in years he felt powerless. His ex-wife Yoon Hae-rin stood among them, lips curved in a satisfied smile. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was permission. Madame Kang bowed slightly, apologizing for things she had never done, for choices that were never hers. Each word felt like a weight added to Min-jae's chest. He took a step forward, ready to end the scene no matter the cost. Then a soft voice cut through the tension. That's not true. The words were gentle, but they landed like thunder. All eyes turned to a young black woman standing near the service table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her name tag read Aaliyah Brooks. She looked terrified, anyone could see that, but her eyes were steady. Madame Kang turned in surprise. Min-jae froze. My grandmother always said, Aaliyah continued, swallowing hard, that blaming someone who isn't speaking back is the easiest kind of cruelty. And it's not right. The room went silent again, but this time the silence was afraid. Min-jae stared at the girl who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. In that moment something shifted inside him. Power, he realized, didn't always arrive with force. Sometimes it arrived with quiet courage. And he would never forget her face. The tension in the ballroom did not disappear after Aaliyah spoke. It simply changed shape. Whispers returned, sharper now, filled with disbelief and offense. People stared at her as though she had broken an unspoken rule, one that said kindness had no place among power. Aaliyah felt every gaze like heat against her skin. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain others could hear it. Still she did not move. Madame Kang Sun-hee was the first to speak. She turned fully toward Aaliyah, her expression unreadable at first. Then slowly her eyes softened. For the first time that evening, her shoulders relaxed. She did not thank the girl aloud, but the small nod she gave carried more gratitude than words ever could. That was when Kang Min-jae stepped forward. The room seemed to shift around him. Conversations died instantly. People who had mocked moments earlier now looked away, suddenly fascinated by their drinks or the floor. Min-jae stopped beside Aaliyah, close enough that she could sense his presence before she dared to look at him. You should leave, someone whispered urgently to her. But Min-jae spoke first. She spoke the truth, he said calmly. His voice was not raised, yet it echoed. There was no anger in it, only certainty. He placed himself slightly in front of his mother, a quiet declaration of loyalty that needed no explanation. Yoon Hae-rin's smile finally faltered. Aaliyah's knees felt weak. She had not expected this. She had assumed she would be dismissed, scolded, maybe even fired. Instead, the most feared man in the room had chosen to stand beside her. The event ended shortly after. Guests left quickly, pretending schedules mattered more than shame. Aaliyah gathered her things with shaking hands, trying not to draw attention to herself as she headed for the exit. Miss Brooks. She turned. Min-jae stood a few steps away, his mother beside him. Up close he did not look like a monster or a legend. He looked tired. Human. Thank you, Madame Kang said softly, bowing her head. Aaliyah panicked and bowed back, nearly dropping her bag. I just said what I felt was right. Min-jae reached into his pocket and offered her an envelope. For the trouble. Aaliyah stepped back immediately. No, sir. I didn't do it for money. That answer caught him off guard. As she walked away, Min-jae watched her disappear into the night, a strange warmth settling in his chest. For the first time since his divorce he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. The rain started just as Aaliyah stepped outside, thin at first, then steady, tapping against the pavement like a nervous heartbeat. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and hurried toward the bus stop, her mind replaying the night in fragments. The stairs, the silence, the man with the unreadable eyes. She did not expect him to follow. Miss Brooks. The sound of his voice made her stop. Slowly she turned. Kang Min-jae stood beneath the awning, the city lights reflecting off the wet street behind him. Without the ballroom's shadows and whispers, he looked different, less distant, more real. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. Aaliyah nodded, unsure what to say. She kept a careful distance, her hands gripping her bag as if it were an anchor. "You already did," she replied quietly. "Your mother, she was kind." Min-jae's gaze softened at the mention of his mother. She hasn't smiled like that in a long time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the space between them, steady and calm. "You didn't hesitate," he said at last. "Most people would have." Aaliyah shrugged, eyes lowered. "I was scared. I just don't like watching people get hurt when they can't defend themselves." Something in her words struck him deeper than he expected. He was a man surrounded by guards, enemies and power struggles. Yet here stood someone whose strength came from empathy, not fear. He offered her a ride. She hesitated, then politely declined. "I take the bus," she said. "It helps me think." Min-jae accepted her answer without pressure, another surprise. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a simple card. "If you ever need anything," he said. "Or if my mother wishes to see you again." Aaliyah took it carefully as if it might disappear. Their fingers brushed for a brief second and both noticed. When the bus arrived, she climbed aboard and took a seat by the window. As it pulled away, she looked back to see Min-jae still standing there, watching. That night, Min-jae returned home to an empty house that no longer felt as heavy. Somewhere in the city, a shy girl with brave words existed, and for the first time he wondered if his story was truly over. And Aaliyah, clutching the card in her pocket, wondered the same. Days passed, but the memory of that night refused to fade. For Aaliyah, the tea house became both a refuge and a place of restless thought. Steam curled from porcelain cups, carrying the scent of herbs and warmth, yet her mind often drifted back to the man in black and the calm gravity of his voice. She told herself it was nothing, just a moment, a strange intersection of lives that would never meet again. Then one quiet afternoon the bell above the door rang. Aaliyah looked up and felt her breath catch. Kang Min-jae stepped inside the tea house, dressed simply without guards or grandeur. He looked out of place at first, tall and serious among soft wooden tables and hanging plants, yet he moved with deliberate care, as though he did not want to disturb the calm. Her aunt greeted him with practiced politeness and guided him to a corner table. Min-jae ordered tea, then glanced around the room, until his eyes found Aaliyah. Recognition flickered between them. Aaliyah busied herself preparing his order, her hands trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. When she brought the tray over, Min-jae offered a small nod, respectful and quiet. "I didn't know you worked here," he said. "I didn't know you liked tea," she replied before she could stop herself. A hint of a smile touched his lips. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Madame Kang soon joined him, her presence gentle and curious. She asked Aaliyah questions about her family, her dreams, her life. There was no judgment in her eyes, only warmth. Slowly the walls around Aaliyah's heart lowered. Min-jae spoke little, but he listened closely. He watched how Aaliyah moved through the space with care, how customers seemed calmer after speaking with her. It was a world far from his own, yet one he found himself craving. One evening as the shop closed, Madame Kang squeezed Aaliyah's hands and smiled. "You bring peace," she said simply. After they left, Aaliyah stood alone, realizing something had changed. This was no longer a coincidence. Across the city, Min-jae sat in silence, knowing the same truth. Their paths were crossing again, for a reason. The truth did not arrive gently. It never did. Aaliyah learned who Kang Min-jae truly was on a quiet morning that began like any other. The tea house television, usually muted, played a news segment while her aunt prepared supplies in the back. A familiar face appeared on the screen, serious, composed, unmistakable. Kang Min-jae. Business leader. Underworld figure. Recently divorced Mafia boss. Aaliyah froze. The reporter's voice continued, listing rumors, power struggles and whispered fears. The words felt heavy, pressing against her chest. This was not just a man who liked tea. This was someone whose world was built on danger and shadows. When the bell rang later that afternoon, her heart sank. Min-jae stepped inside, unaware that everything had already changed. She avoided his eyes. Her movements were stiff, careful. Min-jae noticed immediately. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah swallowed. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Silence stretched between them. Minjae exhaled slowly then stood. We should talk. They sat across from each other, the small table suddenly feeling too exposed. For the first time Minjae spoke openly, not as a feared man but as a tired one. He told her about his divorce, about a marriage built on appearances instead of understanding. He spoke of the choices he made to protect his family, and the cost of carrying power without love. I didn't come here to hide, he said. I came because this place felt safe. Aaliyah listened, torn between empathy and fear. Your world scares me, she admitted. I don't belong in it. Minjae nodded. I know. He did not reach for her. He did not ask her to stay. Instead he stood, bowing his head slightly. I won't come again if my presence troubles you. That restraint hurt more than anger would have. After he left, the tea house felt emptier than ever. Aaliyah stared at the door long after it closed, realizing something painful and honest. Fear did not erase feeling. Across the city Minjae sat alone, knowing he had finally told the truth, and might have lost the only peace he'd found in years. The rumors spread faster than Aaliyah could breathe. At first they were whispers, customers speaking in hushed tones, glances that lingered too long. Then came the messages online, cruel and careless, tying her name to a world she had never chosen. By the end of the week, the tea house felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. Aaliyah tried to stay strong. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. Still, the weight of being watched, judged, and misunderstood pressed down on her until it became unbearable. One evening, after closing, she sat alone on the floor behind the counter, her back against the shelves, tears slipping silently down her face. She did not hear the door open. Aaliyah. She looked up, startled. Minjae stood there, rain on his coat, worry etched into his features. My mother told me what's been happening, he said. I'm sorry. The apology broke something inside her. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I just wanted a quiet life. He took a careful step forward, stopping at a respectful distance. I know. And I should have protected you better. Her shoulders shook as the fear she had been holding back finally spilled free. Without thinking, she stood, and Minjae opened his arms, silently asking permission. She nodded. The hug was gentle, unhurried. No promises, no demands, just warmth and safety. For the first time in days, Aaliyah felt like she could breathe. I don't want you to get hurt because of me, she said softly. Minjae rested his chin lightly against her shoulder, careful, respectful. And I don't want to live a life where kindness is punished. They pulled apart slowly, both changed. Outside the rain eased. Inside, something fragile but hopeful began to grow. Peace never lasted long in Minjae's world. It was something he had learned early, and yet he still hoped this time might be different. Yoon Hae-rin returned without warning. She appeared at a social luncheon hosted by Madame Kang, her arrival carefully planned and impossible to ignore. Elegant as ever, she smiled as if nothing had broken between them, as if the divorce had been a simple misunderstanding rather than a final goodbye. Aaliyah felt her presence before she knew her name. The room shifted when Yoon Hae-rin noticed her, standing quietly beside Madame Kang, hands folded, offering help where needed. Her eyes narrowed, sharp with recognition and jealousy. So this is her, Hae-rin said lightly, her tone sweet but cold. The girl who enjoys playing the hero. The words drew attention. Conversations paused. Aaliyah stiffened, but she did not step back. Minjae moved instantly, placing himself between them. That's enough, he said calmly. Hae-rin laughed softly. You always did choose strange comforts, Minjae. First pity, now charity? The insult hung in the air. Minjae's voice did not rise. She is neither. And you will speak to her with respect, or not at all. The room fell silent. For the first time since the divorce, Hae-rin had no control. Aaliyah's hands trembled, but Minjae's steady presence grounded her. He did not touch her, yet his protection was clear. I won't return to the past, Minjae continued. And I won't allow you to harm the present. Hae-rin's smile faded. Without another word, she turned and left. Later, Aaliyah stood alone on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before her. Minjae joined her, leaving space between them. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said. She shook her head. I'm not afraid anymore. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time, allowed himself to hope not just for peace, but for love. The night after the luncheon, sleep refused to come easily. Aaliyah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Minjae's words over and over. I won't return to the past. They echoed with quiet certainty, yet her heart remained restless. Courage was one thing. Choosing a future was another. The next day she asked to meet him. They walked side by side through a quiet park, winter air crisp around them. There were no guards, no crowds, just open space and honest silence. Aaliyah stopped near a bare tree and finally spoke. "I don't know how to live in your world," she said. "I'm afraid I'll always be looking over my shoulder." Min-jae faced her fully. "Then don't live in it," he replied. She blinked. "What?" "I don't want someone who follows me out of fear," he said gently. "I want someone who walks beside me by choice. If that means I change, then I will." The words stunned her. Power had always demanded sacrifice from others. She had never heard it offered so freely. "I won't rush you," Min-jae continued. "I won't cage you with promises or pressure. Whatever we become, it will be because you chose it." Aaliyah felt tears rise, not from fear but from relief. She stepped closer, closing the distance herself this time. When she wrapped her arms around him, the hug felt different, intentional, steady, full of trust. Min-jae held her carefully as if she were something precious rather than fragile. In that moment, Aaliyah understood something important. Love did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived with patience, and she was ready to take the next step without fear. Change did not come overnight, but it came with purpose. Min-jae began by doing what he had avoided for years, stepping into the light. He attended public events again, this time not to dominate the room, but to correct the stories that had been twisted around his family. Quietly, firmly, he addressed the lies that had followed his divorce, making it clear that his mother had never been the cause of his broken marriage. Madame Kang's son, he stood beside him, her dignity restored not through revenge but through truth. Aaliyah watched from a distance at first, unsure of where she belonged. She still wore her simple clothes, still moved gently through the world, but something inside her had changed. She no longer shrank from attention. She had learned that courage could be calm. One afternoon, Madame Kang invited Aaliyah to tea at her home. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that you gave my son back his heart before he even realized it was missing." Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. She had always believed love meant proving worth. Now she understood it could also mean being welcomed. As Min-jae walked them through the garden, he reached for Aaliyah's hand, not to claim but to ask. She squeezed it in answer. The past no longer ruled them. The shadows that once followed Min-jae began to loosen their grip. For the first time, his strength came not from control but from clarity. And Aaliyah realized she was no longer just passing through his life. She was home. The city was quiet that morning, sunlight spilling softly across the streets, painting them gold. For Kang Min-jae, it was the kind of peace he hadn't felt in years, not the fleeting kind that came between battles or business deals, but true, steady calm. Aaliyah stood beside him on the balcony of Madame Kang's home, her hand in his, fingers intertwined naturally. The warmth of her touch was a reminder that some things could not be bought, demanded, or controlled. They were simply given and received freely. Min-jae turned to her, eyes soft, free of the usual intensity that had marked his life for so long. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just me, all of this. I never thought peace could feel like this." Aaliyah smiled, the gentle curve of her lips matching the light in her heart. "We changed it together," she replied. "And I've never felt safer than I do right now, standing here with you." They spent the morning walking through the garden, each flower, each bird, each sound of life around them a quiet testament to the future they were building. There were no grand declarations, no speeches. Just presence. Just understanding. Madame Kang watched from the veranda, a small smile on her face. The shame that had once haunted her was gone. She felt the last of the fear tied to her son's past dissolve, replaced by gratitude, for Aaliyah's courage, Min-jae's strength, and the love that had finally arrived for them both. Later, Min-jae and Aaliyah sat together under the wide branches of an old oak tree. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and she leaned in naturally, resting her head against him. The world outside continued its busy rhythm, but here, time slowed. "I never thought I could have this," Min-jae murmured. "Quiet. Safe. Free." "Maybe," Aaliyah said, "that's what we deserve when we find the right person to stand beside us." He kissed the top of her head, a soft promise without words. And in that silent, perfect moment, they both understood that forever was not a grand gesture. It was the quiet, steady heartbeat of shared trust, comfort, and love. Together they stepped back into the house, hands still entwined, ready to face life side by side, leaving the shadows of the past behind.